Hello everyone, and welcome to the last round of the London Chess Classic. When Michael Adams lost against Magnus Carlsen, he said in an interview with Maurice that he has a bad score against every player in this tournament, but this actually isn't the case when playing against Caruana. So far until this game, the result was 5 wins each and 6 draws, so it was equal. And this game will proclaim the winner of their mutual encounters. So let's see this game. Fabiano has the white pieces, and he has to win this game to tie with Nepo and go into the tie breaks. He plays c4, so an English opening against the Englishman Michael Adams. Knight to f6, knight to c3, we have e5, the two knights variation, knight to f3, and knight to c6, the four knights variation of the English opening. g3, d5, c captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and bishop to g2. And here, black could capture, knight captures on c3, and after b captures, play bishop to c5, and this is perfectly fine for black. But Adams decides to go for bishop to c5 immediately. Caruana castles, Adams castles, and d3 now. Rook to e8 and knight to g5. Now opening up a discovered attack on this knight, and maybe due to this it was better to capture on c3 immediately. So okay, knight back to f6 and queen to b3. Already this is move 10, Caruana has a queen on b3, knight on g5, and threatening the unprotected f7 pawn. Queen to e7, and a move like rook to f8 probably would have been better. But this is always hard when you play rook to e8, admit that it was a mistake and play it back to f8. But okay, maybe this is a line, maybe queen e7 is better. So queen to e7, knight to d5 now with a tempo on the queen, knight captures, bishop captures, and now the bishop, queen, and the knight are attacking f7. Knight to d8, now knight is defending the f-pawn as well, and here queen to c4. An interesting line would be knight to e4, attacking the dark square bishop, and after knight to e6, knight captures, and queen to a3. And after bishop to h3, rook to e1, c6, and bishop to c4, and it's a pretty different game than what players decided to go for, but still an equal game. So after knight to d8, Caruana chose queen to c4, probably to try and win this. He needs to win this game. Bishop to d4 now, and the bishop to d4 is actually a great square for the bishop. An interesting line here would be to play e3. Kind of, you attack the bishop, but then again your bishop on c1 isn't protecting the knight on g5. But after bishop to b6, queen to h4 now, attacking h7, h6, knight to f3, and now queen captures, knight captures, and c6. And black is solid here. There is nothing for white to look for in this position. So after bishop to d4, bishop back to g2 by Caruana first, h6, knight to f3, and knight to c6. Bishop to e3, and now Caruana allows Adams to triple his pawns, and Adams does this. Bishop captures, f captures, and now e4. Of course, Caruana could capture the pawn with the queen, but then he's going into an endgame with tripled e pawns. So d captures on e4, and now a5. And before I forget, I wanted to say this in the beginning. This game actually lasted for 6 hours. So 6 hours they battled it out. a3 and rook to a6, preparing rook b6 to go for the b2 pawn. Rook a to c1, now rook b6, rook to c2, defending the pawn, and bishop to e6 with a tempo on the queen, queen c3, and rook to b3 now. Queen to d1, and now rook to d8, and Adams is playing every move with a tempo, and he's really bringing his pieces into the game. They're really coming alive. And here queen to c1, and queen to c1 is the only move that is good for Caruana. If he tried something like knight to d4, it seems like okay, you're attacking the rook, and if black captures, you undouble your pawns. It seems like a great idea. But after knight to d4, queen to g5 now. And now the queen is attacking d3 pawn, the rook as well. Your knight is just pinned on d4. It's not really something white would enjoy. So after rook to d8, queen to c1, definitely the best move. a4 now, locking that rook on b3, rook to c5, rook to d7, h3 now, queen to d8, and g4. g6, king to h1, king to g7, e5, bishop to d5 now, king to g1, bishop back to e6, king to f2. Both players are now searching what the other guy will play. Queen to e7, king to g1, and the rook to d5. Okay, rook to c4, attacking the a4 pawn, rook to a5, defending, and rook to c2. Bishop to d5 again, and now knight to d4. And here, knight captures on d4 was played by Adams, allowing e captures on d4, undoubling the pawns. And this seems like a weird choice, but if you play something like rook to b6 to protect the knight, because the bishop is also attacking it, after bishop captures on d6, on d5, rook captures, and e6, black is actually falling apart. You have to capture the pawn, capture, and now knight captures on c6, rook captures, b captures, and queen captures. Black is down a pawn, but also with 4 pawn islands, it's basically a winning position for white if played correctly. So after knight to d4, knight captures on d4 was the lesser evil. E captures on d4 and rook to g3, and this rook to g3 is probably why Adams went for this knight captures on d4. It seems like, okay, the bishop is pinned, the bishop and rook are attacking the bishop on g2, and Caruana has some options here, like playing e3, so the rook on c2 would be defending the bishop. Also, rook to f2 is an option, but Caruana finds the absolute best maneuver, and it's a very nice maneuver. Rook to f3. Seems like he's given up a rook, but bishop captures on f3 was played in the game, and here e captures on f3 was played, trapping the rook. So this rook will have to, sacrifice itself for the exchange here. But an interesting variation actually arises here after rook to f3. What if black plays queen to h4 now to protect the rook? Then rook captures on g3, queen captures, and queen to f1, stopping checkmate on g2, and this is perfectly fine for white. Bishop captures, queen captures, let's say queen b3, attacking the rook. Rook captures on c7, rook captures on e5. Now you can't capture the rook, or you'll get queen b6 check and you lose the c7 rook. But here simply rook captures on f7, king captures, and d captures on e5. And as you can see, you're down 2 pawns, and it's a winning position for white. So after rook to f3, bishop captures on f3 by Adams, e captures, and now c6. King to h2, now the rook must sacrifice itself. Rook captures, king captures, and rook to d5. Rook to c4, again attacking the a4 pawn. c5 now. Rook captures on c5 for rook captures on d4. Queen to c3. Positioning the queen to that king on g7, queen to d8, rook to c8, attacking the queen, queen b6, and rook to e8. We have g5, rook to e7, now threatening e6 with tempo, king to g8, and now e6 altogether, because the queen can't capture. If you capture with the queen, you lose it, of course, so f captures e6 is the only move. F captures, and now queen to c2. Here Caruana gave up that pawn. Queen c8 doesn't really do anything. You can simply retreat with the queen or with the rook. But queen to c2 actually threatens checkmate with queen to h7 check, and then followed by g7 or f7 checkmate. So king to f8, not allowing the queen to jump to h7 with tempo. Rook to h7 now, and it's a very tricky position. Here Adams played queen to c6, offering a trade of queens. Because if he plays something like queen to d6 to threaten rook d2, for example, winning the queen, this actually loses to a forced checkmate in 7 moves. Rook h8 check, king e7, queen h7 check, king f6, now captures, king f7, rook check, king e8, and now queen g6 check, king d8, and queen to g8, followed by queen has to block, and the queen captures on f8 with a nice checkmate. So after rook h7, Adams decided to trade queens. Queen captures, b captures. Caruana is happy to trade queens. it's not, the material is equal. Both players have 5 pawns and the rook. It's an almost like an equal rook ending, but again, black has 4 pawn islands, white has only 2, and in rook endings this matters a lot. Plus the king is protecting all the pawns on the king side, and Adam's king is pretty cut off from the game. So rook captures on h6, already grabbing a pawn, king f7, king g3, rook to d2, rook h7 check, king f6, and rook to b7, defending the b2 pawn. King e5, h4 now, captures, king f4, with a very nice idea of rook to h2 checkmate. So rook to f7 check, pushing the king back, king g3, now rook to d1, and in this position, when you realize that even though capturing the pawn is the best move, you don't really gain anything by it, and by now you realize that you lost this game. Rook to d1, g5 now, rook checks, king h4, rook g2, again going for the pawn, but preparing the pawn to g6, e5 now, pawn to g6, rook captures, king to g5, checks, king h6 checks, king to g7, we have c5, king f7, c4, the pawn is almost almost a queen, rook to h7, pinning the pawn, but rook to a6, and in this position, after 6 hours of playing, Michael Adams resigned the game. What could follow here is simply c3, let's say rook captures c2, the rook is now stopping the pawn, and after something like king to d2, simply a4. This rook will eventually sacrifice itself for the pawn, but the a5 pawn is unstoppable, and the dark rook can't protect both the g pawn and the a pawn, can't stop it. So let's say queen c1, pawn to c1, queen, rook captures, king captures, a5, king to d1, a6, rook h6, a7, rook a6, and g8 queen. Rook captures, and a queen against the rook is completely winning. But yeah, after rook to a6, Michael Adams, the Englishman, resigned the game, and Fabiano Caruana is the winner of the London Chess Classic 2017. If you've seen in my previous video, although Caruana won he is the winner, but he has to go to tiebreaks with Nepomniachtchi. Although I'm making this video just at the moment I saw that Caruana defeated Nepomniachtchi, so he is the winner. But I haven't checked all of the games. I will see if there is a nice game from the tiebreaks. They were 10-minute games, so if there was a nice game, I will show one game, at least one game from that tiebreak. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Michael Sterling and David Vatebled for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Maybe even with another AlphaZero game.